Good morning. We're going to continue Vimala's book on what is meditation. Yeah, it's the second part of the book, a talk given at Dalhousie in 1987. In these morning classes, we have been trying to explore the content of religious inquiry. Until yesterday, we said that for laying the foundation of right inquiry, it is necessary to study and investigate on a verbal level with the help of knowledge, experience, and memory available to us. As we inherit the total human knowledge and experience in our psyche, it is possible to begin the movement of inquiry with an academic and theoretical investigation. The purpose of study is not acquisitive. Learning does not take place if the motivation is of acquiring, owning, and possessing knowledge. Study implies that you make an effort to know in order to understand. Thought, knowledge, can be used as a stepping stone or as a springboard for understanding. Understanding gives you a kind of freedom. Understanding enables you to dodge the overwhelming momentum of the thought structure. It becomes possible through study and understanding to move through the structure of thought, knowledge, and memory in an orderly way without getting imprisoned by the structure. A comparative, relative freedom is the outcome of the action of understanding. If an inquirer goes through this academic and verbal study, and if he or she arrives at an understanding and the freedom of order resulting from that understanding, then the person is equipped to proceed further. Inquiry is a kind of self-education. Education implies unlearning the incorrect and learning the correct ways of living. If education does not involve learning correct ways of living, then it is meaningless. Education implies unlearning the incorrect and learning the correct ways of living. If education does not involve learning correct ways of living, then it is meaningless. So the movement of inquiry is the movement of self-education. It is the rhythmic movement of learning and unlearning. As you learn and find out the truth, you go on dropping the untruth. As you discover the truth, you let the false drop away. If the learning is not accompanied by the act of unlearning, if the discovery of truth is not accompanied by the act of letting go of the false, then it is incomplete. then it will only be intellectual entertainment. Now suppose that you and I, as inquirers, have done this, and we have put the sensual, the verbal, in an orderly, rhythmic way of functioning, giving attention to every minutest detail. Then do you know what happens when you begin to learn? It is actually very interesting and a lot of fun. One who is deeply in love with learning, discovering, finding out the truth for oneself. The fascinating thing that happens about such a person is there is no casualness. Most of us live casually. You look and you don't notice three-quarters of what you're looking at because you look at things directed by specific motivations and you just ignore criminally the rest of life. You're obsessed with your motivations. So you're listening, you're looking, you're replying to questions, your responses to situations are all casual. In casualness, there's no alertness, no vitality. The person casually gets up in the morning, casually takes a bath, casually eats the meats, never totally present in any action. The person who lives casually has no real vitality, no passion. Somehow, because they are born, they reach the point of death, missing the beauty of life, missing the touch of sacredness of life. Most of us live rather casually. If we are not living casually, then we carry a vast variety of burdens. And our act of living is nothing but carrying the burdens. Living for many of us is a burden. You know what a burden is? A sense of responsibility. I must do this. I must not do that. This is a religious compulsion. I must turn to God. This is an ethical compulsion. I must tell the truth. Otherwise, I will go to hell. There's the social, the economic, the cultural, the religious burden. We look upon everything as a burden, as a responsibility, and carry it with us, getting bogged down under the sense of responsibility. Living is no more a joy. I must go to school. I must have a degree. I must have a job. I must marry. I must raise a family, earn my livelihood. We look at all the needs and challenges of life as a burden. I'm trying to share with you the attitude many people have. Some are very casual. They're not interested in life. They don't love life. They're not careful about the act of living. And for some others, living is a task. So they grumble, they groan, they complain that they have to live. So you begin to learn. You study for the sake of learning. Learning for the sake of personal communion with the fact indicated by the words. And communion with facts in order to understand. Communion with facts in order to understand. An understanding in order to be free. This is what self-education is. Spirituality is not intellectual humbug, or emotional trickery, or sensual and sexual manipulations. It is much more than that. Learning brings about a sensitivity and alertness, and a capacity to be attentive. When we say that on the theoretical level, learning brings about freedom, and freedom brings about an understanding, one is very serious. These are not mere words. This is really how it happens. If this is done, if the foundation is laid, you can proceed to the next step. After having arrived at freedom and a rhythm and an orderliness out of that understanding, let me find out actually and factually what reality is. What is thought? What is the mind? What is this I? The books have served their purpose. The lectures, the discourses, the discussions have served their purpose. So we proceed. The movement of inquiry now has proceeded further from the theoretical investigation. With the help of words, it has proceeded further. It's kind of a quantum jump. Now, I'm going to learn through watching, observing what is. I've learned about what is through words. Now let me find out what is without the intervention of this whole structure of knowledge, experience, and memory. Someone sits down and says, "Let me watch, let me observe." Here you begin. You begin with watching. Watching is not synonymous with observing. Have you ever watched a team play cricket? What happens to you? You're watching the game, you're not going to participate, and yet, if somebody hits a sixer, you get excited. This kind of watching, where psychological involvement accompanies the watching, is not observation. So, as a learner, when you sit down and say, "Let me observe," you see that in watching there is psychological involvement. So, you brush it aside, as that is not observation. Then, what is observation? Observation is perception without psychological involvement, without any kind of reaction. Reaction implies, I read the previous line one more time. Then what is observation? Observation is perception without psychological involvement, without any kind of reaction. Reaction implies evaluation, judgment, condemnation, comparison. When you sit down and want to learn to observe, you observe how the movement of evaluation, comparison comes up. Do you see what is happening? The eye consciousness is involved in watching and is also involved in the observation. Observation as a movement of the eye consciousness is a part of self-education. And observation without the movement of the eye would be growth into the dimension of observation. Observation as a part of self-education and observation as a dimension of consciousness. These two things have to be distinguished very clearly. In the beginning, there's bound to be this movement, the movement of inquiry, the movement of I consciousness is bound to be there. Only the movement now has changed. From the theoretical plane, it has come to the practical. From the verbal, it has come to the non-verbal. From reactions, evaluations, judgments, it has come to non-evaluatory perception. Do you see? But it is still the movement of the I. It is still the movement of the ego. An inquirer learns first how to perceive without a reaction, without a comparison. One sits down and continues to observe. When one looks at a thing, memory may come up. One becomes aware of it, and memory subsides. One observes again, and some kind of prejudice or preference comes up. One becomes aware of it, and it is brushed aside. You know, this is how you learn. Gradually, the perception of I consciousness becomes steady. It does not get distracted anymore by the content of memory and the reactions of the mind. It does not react anymore. So first, there was the psychological involvement, the actual participation psychologically with what you were watching. Then there is a non-participatory perception. Yet this is still polluted by memory. This is the first and second phase. And the third phase would be steady flame of perception, unpolluted by any reactions. And yet you are conscious that you are observing. So observation is still a movement of the I consciousness. The I is looking at its own content. As you look at your reflection in the mirror, you're not two persons, you're looking at yourself. In the same way, when the perception is steady, with no distraction and no distortion, there is total attention. Then that is the moment when the I, the me, is looking at its own content innocently. The very perception goes through a qualitative change, and yet it is the I that is looking at its own content. So now you have learned what observation is. So it looks at its own behavior. It looks at its own reflection in the mirror of the movement of relationships. Not only while sitting down quietly in the room for an hour or two, that was part of the learning, but now you have learned and the perception is steady. It has been intensified. So the movement of observation gets carried over from the room where you were sitting quietly to all your relationships throughout the day. In waking consciousness. So the movement of observation gets carried over from the room where you were sitting quietly to all your relationships throughout the day in waking consciousness. Whatever you do, simultaneously you're observing. You're doing and you are observing. Do you see the new faculty? There is a change in the quality of perception. There is a change in the quality of response because there is a wholeness of perception, wholeness in your attention. Excuse me. Every moment a new sharpness, a new edge, because the doer is not absent minded, not distracted. Nothing is done casually. So doing and observing at the same time. It's a dual capacity of the I consciousness. If this is allowed to happen, then every relationship bring to the notice of the if this is allowed to happen, then every relationships excuse me, this is allowed to happen, then every relationship brings to the notice of the observer, to the I consciousness, its own mechanism. You cannot understand the mechanism of the mind in abstraction. You may read 1,000 books, but it's only the intimate personal encounter with the nature of the movement while it is taking place that reveals to you that the movement of the me, the movement of thought, the movement of memory, of knowledge, is repetitive and completely mechanistic. You may read 1,000 books, but it is only the intimate personal encounter with the nature of the movement while it is taking place that reveals to you that the movement of the me, the movement of thought, of memory, of knowledge, is repetitive and completely mechanistic. The discovery of the mechanical, repetitive movement of the whole thought structure is absolutely and urgently necessary. What you had studied through books, now you observe as your facts, as the facts of life. Knowledge is organized information about the facts. Observation is personal encounter with the fact. So the knowledge about the facts gets converted into understanding of facts. No indirectness now. You don't say that the movement of mind is repetitive, mechanistic, because Krishnamurti has said it, or because Patanjali has said it. You don't have to say that because now you have seen it yourself. This seeing, this perceiving is very necessary. Unless you go through these phases, observation as a dimension where there is no observer cannot get stimulated in your psyche. Suppose that one has gone through this phase, and suppose every step of learning results in deepening and intensifying the vitality, then the nearer you are to the vital force of life. The further you are from the unessentials, the mechanical, organized and structured things, the nearer you are to the vital. I'll read it again. Supposing that one has gone through this phase, and supposing every step of learning results in deepening and intensifying the vitality, then the nearer you are to the vital force of life. The further you are from the unessentials, the mechanical, organized and structured things, the nearer you are to the vital force of life. The vitality is not poured into you from anything outside, by anything outside of you. When you leave moving round and round the circumference and leave the unessentials, you are getting nearer to the essence, to the source of all vitality. If and when necessary, you move through the non essentials also. But as you do not identify yourself, but as you do not identify yourself with them, they cannot bog you down, nor can they arrest the flow of understanding taking place in you, the flow of vitality coming up in you. You see for yourself that every movement of the mind, the me, the I, is mechanical, whether it moves in the direction of society, politics, economics, or in the direction of sex, the movement is mechanical. You understand that the mental movement now is irrelevant. The perception, the observation brings the I consciousness to the point that my movement, corrupted by the content, is bound to be mechanical, is bound to refer to concepts, and is bound to create a new measurement to measure the divine. My movement can be only relevant on the conceptual level, but it is irrelevant for further inquiry and for the discovery of the divine nature of life. The inquiry as a movement of the I has served its purpose. It has seen its own limitations and therefore it stops. The relaxation of the mental effort, the relaxation of the mental movement as a fact has to happen within. Because of the inner urge to learn and to live, which is a non-rational, non-calculated urge. Because of that urge, the I consciousness is now willing, is now inclined to stop moving. So maybe until here for today. I wish you a great day, and tomorrow I will continue this talk. So bye for now.